Ricky Craven gets into the big show with a Winston Open victory Saturday night at Charlotte Motor Speedway in the All-Star race. Jeff Gordon stomps the field from the back to the front twice, celebrates in victory lane his win in the Winston. And in the NASCAR Busch Series, Elliott Sadler does the victory dance for the first time in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. A review of those races next on Inside Winston Cup Racing. Hi, welcome to Inside Winston Cup Racing. Our driver panel assembled in our Charlotte studios again to take you through the big All-Star weekend at Charlotte, as well as Sunday's NASCAR Busch Series race on the Tricky Mile in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. Alan Bestwick here, joined as always by Ken Schrader, driver of Andy Petrie Racing Chevrolet, Michael Waltrip here, driver of the Wood Brothers Citgo Ford, and Johnny Benson, driver of the Pennzoil Pontiac for Bahari Racing. And let's start by talking about the All-Star race on Saturday night. What'd you think of the Winston? Gordon was pretty awesome.
He was real awesome. The car ran great, and come from the back like that twice, it was pretty good.
Johnny, 7th in the Winston Open for you. What happened?
Just not quite good enough, there's no doubt about it. And we're going to bring a different car back for this weekend, and seeing this car didn't work out the way we wanted.
Kenny, you ran from 21st to 9th in the Open. Pretty strong. Again, just not strong enough.
Well, it started too far back, you know, and you just 50 laps and no yellows, not enough time to get it done.
Michael, obviously, one of the things that people probably most know by now is the fact that Leonard Wood, your crew chief, was involved in a very serious accident leaving the race at Charlotte on Saturday night, in which his wife, unfortunately, was killed. How's everybody holding up?
Well, I think everyone's doing as well as could be expected. Fortunately, Leonard's daughter is doing well today, and his granddaughter as well. Probably the best relationship between a man and a wife I've ever seen in my whole life was Leonard and Betty May, so it's going to be real hard on Leonard, obviously, as time goes on. So while we're praying for the family now and thinking of them now, it'll be important to remember them in the weeks to come, as well as Leonard tries to deal with this on a day-to-day basis.
Now, obviously, there's been a big outpouring from race fans wanting to express their sympathy to Leonard and the Wood family, and we have an address that we're going to show to you of where folks can do just that.
Yeah, they in lieu of flowers, they wanted the donations to be sent to the Presbyterian Church there in Stewart in Betty May Wood's name to try to help out in that situation, and it's a way that the fans and people in the family of NASCAR racing itself can express their sorrow and try to help some others in Betty May's name.
Been a very difficult weekend, naturally, for Michael and the members of the Wood Brothers team, let alone the Wood family, and we all are thinking about them as well. We're going to take a minute, regroup, come back, and jump into our review of the All-Star weekend from Charlotte. After this, don't go away.
Today on Inside Winston Cup Racing, we'll talk to Mark Martin about his Winston Cup career, Jack Roush, the Winn-Dixie Ford, and how you can win one of his race cars. And we'll show you Darrell Waltrip's Winston winning run of 1985 as we celebrate DW's 25 years in racing. Inside Winston Cup Racing is brought to you by Slick 50. Use new Slick 50 Synchron Fuel System Treatment, the 5,000-mile performer. And by Slim Jim. When you need a little excitement, snap into a beefy, spicy Slim Jim.
We get Inside Winston Cup Racing cranked up with a look at the racing headlines from the past week. That is the Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Last Tuesday, Bob and Gary Baer, the father and son team who built and now run the New Hampshire International Speedway, named to be the president and vice president of that racetrack, added to the management team, not the ownership of the Speedway. Richie Klein says they've just basically been helping them all along anyway. That's the Remington Ford that Jerry Kinnan is no longer the crew chief of. Team owner Butch Mock says there just wasn't any chemistry between driver Rick Mast and Jerry Kinnan, so he had to make a change. This was the highlight of the weekend at Charlotte as far as I'm concerned. Jeff Gordon trying to get stopped for his pit stop during qualifying.
Yeah, it seems like every year somebody does it, and this time it was Jeff, and he was going for it and coming there just a tad hot.
A little bit hot, and Jeff Gordon had to start 19th. Here's Bill Elliott's successful entry onto pit road Friday night.
Bill had an awesome entry on the pit road. Probably, excuse me, the pit stop and his exit from pit road were the two keys. You can see he stops the car right next to the retaining wall so the crew doesn't have too far to run. That makes the stop quicker, but when he leaves right here, you see very little tire spin. It does it at first, and then right there, the car's hooked up and he's running strong.
50 grand to Elliott's team for that pole win for the Winston. After the qualifying, Mark Martin took advantage of a late caution to win the IROC race. Jimmy Vasser had a huge lead until that late yellow. And that's North Carolina Motor Speedway. This morning, Penske Motorsports announced it has completed its purchase of Mrs. Carrie DeWitt's stock in the racetrack there that hosts the NASCAR Winston Cup and NASCAR Busch Series twice annually. So now Penske Motorsports owns basically 70% of Rockingham. Now, still on the table are the two offers by Penske and by Bruton Smith Speedway Motorsports to take complete control of the track. The board of directors has to vote on sometime shortly for the rest of the stockholders of the Speedway which of those two merger proposals they want to accept. Penske says he'll vote his 70% in favor of accepting the Penske offer. Pretty understandable there. We turn to our drivers to discuss some of the news of the weekend. And Michael, let's get to your qualifying run on Friday. We didn't show it there, but fourth, pretty good effort.
Well, we were really fast to the pit stall. When I made my pit stop, the guys were clocking, and we made it to that point, to the point of making the pit stop faster than anybody that had run it up until then. The pit stop was awesome, but leaving the pit, I just didn't do a good job getting down pit road. I spun my tires way too much, and when I should have been making traction, I was making smoke, and just gave a lot away leaving the pit.
Kenny, looked like Jimmy Vasser had that IROC race in the bag, and then it all went away real late.
Well, Jimmy jumped out there real quick and was doing a fabulous job, but Mark was just kind of hanging back. And knowing Mark, I think Mark was looking like every so often at that lap counter and was possibly waiting for a late race charge. I would have betted that way. They had a yellow flag and closed the gap up, and then Jimmy had his hands full with Mark, and Mark eventually got round, but Jimmy Vasser really did a good job.
Need to come back to Michael and ask you briefly about your venture into NASCAR Winston Cup team ownership this weekend. It didn't go as well as you wanted, did it?
No, it was unsuccessful for sure. We had a great car there put together. Ronnie Silver and all the guys did a good job preparing it. And Joe was doing just great coming up to speed. It's kind of tough to ask a guy to do what we asked him to do, getting in the car like that and getting competitive in just one day. But Joe did a fine job coming up to speed and just had it get away from him a little bit in qualifying. It was unfortunate we drew first to go out and qualify, and the ARCA cars had just run a practice session, and their tires are different than ours, and it really changes the track. So, you know, you can look at it and say, well, it wasn't a real good move on Joe's part, but in all fairness to him, I think the track was the reason he spun out more than anything you could ever imagine.
And what, like out of the first four cars that ran, 2 or 3 of them actually spun out to kind of validate your point. Johnny, I want to talk very quickly about lost my train of thought there for a second. Chemistry, that's where I was going. The Butch Mock crew chief change. You said the chemistry wasn't there with the driver. What does he mean by chemistry?
Well, I think that they just weren't both on the same wavelength. You know, if the car's doing one thing, they probably had 2 or 3 different ideas, and they just couldn't narrow it down, or they couldn't decide what they wanted to do, or they disagreed on what they wanted to do. And that makes it tough where, you know, Winston Cup racing is so competitive, and if you can't make that connection quick enough, it just makes it hard to make races, and it's pretty tough on everybody, the whole team. So, I mean, it was probably the best thing to do is to make a change and see if they can't find somebody that's going to, you know, gel a little bit quicker.
So there, a recap of the headlines from the past week in NASCAR racing. A short time out. We come back and get into our review of the Winston Open from Saturday night at Charlotte next. With 21 laps to go in the Winston Open Saturday night at Charlotte, Ricky Craven moves by Lake Speed. He would go on to score the win in the heat race, if you will, with just that one spot transferring into the All-Star race later in the evening. We review the Winston Open now with Kenny, Michael, and Johnny, and start off with the fact that the format was changed this year, getting back to just the winner getting in. How'd that change the way you approach the race?
Well, obviously, you need to win the race. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But before, it was like, well, you know, if you could get up to 5th and hold on to 5th, not have to worry about going to the front, it was, you know, a little bit more insurance, I guess you could say. But this time, man, you had you had to go, and if you couldn't see the leader, you knew you were in trouble.
You had to go, and that pretty well sums up where we lead off with our first bit of highlights, because right off the start, from about 7th back to about 20th, they were going, and I can't believe we didn't get through here without somebody ended up turned around.
I tell you, that was pretty tough. You know, I could see what was going on. I didn't get the start that I needed to, but then eventually we started passing cars and making some moves that you normally wouldn't do, I guess you could say, on a race that's more than 50 laps long.
Robbie Gordon really lit off there at the start. He was charging for a little while.
Yeah, that was turn 3 and 4 and then back into 1. When he went around 1 the first time, he was against the wall, passing cars left or passing cars to the right in a hurry. It was awesome looking. And Johnny moved up the racetrack and started to make some real good time on the high side. Just caught a bad break or two, didn't you?
Yeah, we just got into a spot where I was making time. I passed a bunch of guys, and then I got behind a car that I think he thought I was going to the inside, and I went to the outside, and I lost all them spots that I tried to get. And eventually we made it back up, but 7th is not going to do it. You know, you had to win that race.
With all that hustle going on, how do we get away with no cautions?
Yeah, and I mean, for sure, just like Mikey said, because it's just like Talladega, you know, how everybody come in with tire marks on the sides of the cars, you know. It looked like they've been running Martinsville and no yellows there. Every once in a while, we don't wreck despite ourselves.
With all that racing going on in the field, say from 5th, 6th on back, the lead few got away, and Chad Little led the first 21 laps of the race. Here he is being chased by, and passed eventually, by Lake Speed. And the thing that we'll note in here is when they get off turn 2, Ricky Craven thinks just for a second about making it 3 wide. Tell me what he's thinking about when they come off 2 here.
He's thinking he wants to lead this race because that's the only guy that's gonna make the race. And I was pretty impressed that he backed off. He had a shot to do it, and he didn't do it because he knew that them other 2 guys want to win this race, and it could have been pretty ugly. So he just hung back and knew his car was good enough to get him here in a couple more laps. I don't know how far we were into the race, but it wasn't near the end there.
It's about 22 laps here, and Ricky kind of does a little, well, should I? No, I'll wait, thank you. And it paid off for him. Lake and Ricky would pass Chad at lap 22, and 7 laps later, Mr. Craven goes after the move that would eventually become the winning move off turn 4 down the front stretch.
Well, I think winning this race, it's obvious, was done on Friday night during qualifying. The thing broke without a caution. These 2 cars right here qualified 2nd and 3rd. Chad was on the pole. You needed a good starting spot to be able to transfer. All that action in the back that those guys were making such good time, I had my stopwatch on both these guys, and they were running as fast as the leaders were. But they gave up that track position because they both went out early in the qualifying like we talked earlier. The track was slick. They didn't get the laps they wanted. It cost them a chance to win the race.
Steve Grissom got by Lake Speed for 2nd late in the race and made a charge at Ricky Craven in the final laps. Kenny said he ran out of right front tire. What does that mean?
Well, I'm sure it means that this car got tight on him, and he just had trouble keeping it down on the bottom of the racetrack. But I'll tell you what, for running out of tires, he still made an awful good charge and got close.
So Steve Grissom pursuing, but not able to do anything with Ricky Craven. And Craven wins the Winston Open and gets himself the 20th starting spot in the All-Star race. Checking the finishing order from the Winston Open shows us Craven in victory lane with Grissom, Lake Speed, Chad Little, and Hut Strickland running up from 16th starting spot to 5th. Good effort for Hut. And we go on now to the rest of our top 10 finishers, finding both Mr. Benson and Schrader in that group. Take a quick break, come back and check out the Winston, the All-Star race, next.
Just ahead on IWCR, we'll head back to Nazareth, Pennsylvania to give our driver panel a chance to analyze all the NASCAR Busch Series action in the Core States Advantage 200. And as race week really heats up in Charlotte, we'll go for a ride around the 1.5-mile Charlotte Motor Speedway to look ahead to the longest race on the schedule, the Coca-Cola 600.
Jeff Gordon and his DuPont teammates have a champagne shower in Victory Lane Saturday night after whipping the field in the 13th running of the Winston. Welcome back to our studios inside Winston Cup Racing, here to take you through the 13th running of the All-Star race with Kenny, Michael, and Johnny. The format this year, the same as it's been the last several, 30 laps, invert the field, 30 laps, double them up, and then run 10 for all the big bucks. and Gordon was pretty well dominant. We start off the first 30 laps basically with the best racing of the night. Bill Elliott and Dale Earnhardt from the front row, and they put on quite a show in the early laps.
Yeah, they sure did. I mean, they swapped the lead a couple times there. And
Earnhardt wiggle right there.
Yeah, he definitely got loose, and then time Dale Jarrett got up in there, and man, it was just a heck of a race.
Earnhardt tried to run in there a little bit hard on Elliott and kind of went up the racetrack. I would bet that's a pretty uncomfortable feeling when that happens to you there.
Well, Charlotte is a track where you need a lot of grip. I mean, it's a slick racetrack, and when you get side by side with another guy, you got your hands full. And Dale dove it in there, so he didn't have to be side by side with Bill in the middle of the corner, but he might have shot her in there a little hot, and the thing got sideways with him anyway.
Earnhardt would get the lead at lap number 9. We'll show you now the only caution of the running of the Winston at lap 3. Watch the top right side of your screen. Bobby Labonte in the green car with Mark Martin right behind him. They'll come into your picture and things happen quick.
Yeah, it's a place where the car unloads real easy, and it looks like, you know, Mark was just carrying a little more momentum right there than Bobby was and run into him, just ever so slightly, but that's all it takes. Some good driving, heads-up driving, and that luck comes back in that Bobby didn't slide all the way across up to the fence and collect up a couple other cars.
Ernie Irvin and Jeff Burton and Jimmy Spencer all making some nice moves to miss Bobby. What was one of you guys call that, the slide for life a couple weeks ago? Basically, you're just going down through there and...
You're a passenger is all you are right then. You know, Bobby, he let off the brakes a couple times when he thought he had it gathered up straight, and once he knew he didn't, he got right back on the brakes, and he did all you could do, that's for sure.
That's the second time Bobby had been in the grass during the weekend. He spun down through the grass, pretty similar to that almost during practice for that flying pit stop in qualifying. Said they didn't need any more lawnmowers at Charlotte. He had done the job for them. After Earnhardt led for 4 laps, Dale Jarrett asserted himself and took over and basically pulled away to dominate the rest of the first segment.
Well, he dominated that segment, but there were cars that were coming up through the field that would have made him look silly had they have gotten there. He was running about 31:30 or so, and I was running 6th in this segment and could run basically 31:30 or 40 myself, not too far off of him. Jeff Gordon, you see him just coming into view there. He was mowing up through the field, and when Bobby Labonte, after the restart, he was fast as well. Maybe he used a little bit of strategy after his spin not to get too far ahead, but in the second segment, he led the race at about 31 flat, so it was a big difference.
Yeah, I would say so. Gordon from 19th to 3rd by lap 30, pretty impressive. Now we get a 10-minute break to work on the cars. Okay, you can't change shocks by rule. You can't change springs. What can you do to help it?
There's a lot of things you can do, honestly, even though you can't change some of the what seems like major deals. Tire pressure is a big deal these days. We can adjust the track bar. We can take wedge in and out. There's a lot of things that we can do to help the handling of them. Unfortunately, we didn't do it. We didn't help ours like we needed to.
Shocks and springs, I mean, if you look through the garage during practice, those are the things people are throwing around the most at the car trying to help its performance, and yet you can't do that in that race because you're only allowed to do things you would do on pit road normally during a stop in the middle of a continuing race. So is that a big handicap to guys that aren't working right off the start?
Well, if you're not working right off the start, it would be a handicap, but it's just like it's a race. We start those races. You don't get to change shocks and springs and all that during a race, and they tried to simplify it by not letting them change everything. If you let these guys, if you gave them 10 minutes and said, do whatever you want, oh, there'd be unbelievable amounts of things changed, and like carburetors and rear end gears and stuff, and they just got to put a hold on it, and I think it's a good rule.
Field gets inverted from the finish of the first 30 laps to start the second 30 laps, and on the restart there's almost a huge pileup in turn 2. Watch Sterling Marlin in the gold car and Rusty Wallace just outside of him.
That could have been huge. I mean, I don't know if Rusty didn't know he was there, and it was tight there, and I'm sure with Sterling underneath him, he got a little tight and bumped him, and they both did a pretty good job of keeping the cars going in the right direction.
Ward Burton jumping on the brakes, and Ricky Rudd and a couple of other guys there.
Yeah, I talked to Sterling after the race, and he said he was in there, and he said he started thinking Rusty was going to come over, and he did come over, and he said in a race like this, you don't let off, and those two cars got together, and it caused you saw the chain reaction, cars getting into each other way back up the track.
As impressive as Gordon was in the first 30 laps, running from 19th to 3rd, he didn't get noticed that much, like Michael said a minute ago, because there was some pretty good racing going on at the front. But I'll tell you, in that second 30 laps, you knew he was there. 16th to 4th and on the charge.
Yeah, the leaders got away quite a bit. And when Jeff, he got up to 4th, and then he looked like, to me, like he kind of rode for a little bit because they were too far ahead for him to really run them down. and he knew by being fourth in that second segment, he'd have a good starting spot for the last 10 laps. He knew how good his car was, so I think he just stayed right there. But yeah, this is just, we talked about this, and if we knew exactly how he was doing it, we'd be doing it, but just an awesome combination. That was a new car for him.
Bobby and Terry Labonte, we're going to come back to that in a minute because a lot's being made out of that. Bobby and Terry Labonte started up front in segment 2 and basically pulled away and dominated that segment. They did trade the lead, and here it is. This comes up, what are we at lap 42 with 8 to go in this segment.
Yeah, Bobby was definitely running pretty good, and if he would have got the jump there on that last segment probably and gotten the lead, it'd have been a little bit interesting to see what would have happened there.
Bobby good on a long run and pulled away to a pretty good lead at the end of segment number 2. So we double up the field now from the finish at lap 60, and we get set for the final 10-lap dash to the checkered flag. And unlike some past runnings of the Winston, this one was over about 2 laps after they dropped the green flag. Rusty Wallace, Ricky Craven and Gordon lined up behind the brothers Labonte, and off they go.
Well, Ricky had another thought about taking her 3 wide down the back straightaway. With 10 to go, would have probably done it right there, but Bobby blocked him off, and Bobby, you just, when you start on that bottom, sometimes if you don't get a good jump, it's hard to hang on, and although Bobby had a great car, it wasn't a match for Jeff's, and Jeff mows around Terry here, and once he does this, that's it. You watch Terry dive in the corner here. He tries to shoot her on in there past him, but Jeff's car right there in the middle would turn. He could get on the gas and go, and we didn't see many cars that could do that as well as he did.
Jeff Gordon basically cruised away over the final 8 laps from that point to the win. All right, so a lot has been made over the fact that this is a new Hendrick chassis, the next generation and so on. How different can it really be from what they've been running?
Well, it's hard to say.
It's probably something everybody'd like to know right now.
Yeah, we'd like to know, but they were winning before, and they just won again. So, I mean, they won convincingly, so, I mean, it's some maybe small changes, front-end geometry or something. It can't be night and day difference, but there's something. It
wasn't like they were struggling before, you know, and then they brought this thing out and really kicked everybody's tail. They had their stuff together before, and that just shows to show the ability of a good team to make sure they don't sit still and let everybody catch up. You know, you're always trying to do things and improve your program, and this is probably one of those steps.
Check the finish order from Saturday night's 13th running of the Winston at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Pretty nice payday for Jeff Gordon and the DuPont team. Not a bad one for Bobby Labonte either. $130 grand, $50 for winning the second segment plus his second place money. Jimmy Spencer, good top 5 run for the Campbell team. And on down through the list, and the rest of the 20 finishers in Saturday night's running of the Winston. Back to talk about the Nazareth Busch Series race in a little bit. Don't go away. SpeedVision has a pretty neat internet site. Get you more information on our programming along this fine network. www.speedvision.com is the place to go. SpeedVision Online. Catch us if you can. Shortly, we'll preview Sunday's Coca-Cola 600 coming up at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Mark Martin will enter that race, seeking his 3rd straight win in NASCAR Winston Cup Series points races. Phil Wirtz has a visit for us with one of the hottest drivers on the circuit.
Mark Martin is on a serious roll. After a 42-race winless streak, the Batesville, Arkansas native won the Save Mart 300 in Sonoma and the rain-delayed Winston 500 at Talladega. Martin's drought was his longest since joining the series full-time with the Jack Roush Racing Team in 1988. The team has been together now for 10 years, and aside from appreciating the 20 wins with Roush, Martin has also had time during the previous dry spell to reflect upon his career.
I've had a really good career. There was no guarantees when I came down here that I'd ever win a race, and I won a bunch, and there's no guarantees I'll ever win any more, and that's what I like to say. When I say that to people, they say, oh, you'll win a bunch more. And I say, I know, but there's no guarantees, and it's been real good to me.
While the Valvoline team is working on keeping Martin in victory lane, his Busch team is setting records. Martin's win at Talladega in April tied Jack Ingram's all-time BGN victory mark with 30. And after a handful of Busch wins this season, the all-time lead will soon be Mark's.
Need to get the record, but the most important thing is getting the next win, no matter if we've got that record or not. If you would have said 5 years ago that I would have won 30 Busch Grand National races, I would have probably disagreed. I won 4 ASA championships and only won 22 races altogether. So it's you know, it's been really good to me. I've seen the sport grow an awful lot. It means more today than ever to win these things. They're harder to win. We've got a great thing going with Winn-Dixie and plan to keep it going for quite some time.
Martin and Roush Racing plan to keep it going for quite some time, too. Earlier this year, before the inaugural race at Texas, the team and Valvoline announced a 3-year contract extension, keeping Martin in the red, white, and blue Ford Thunderbird through the end of this century.
You know, it's real good for us. We're able to focus. We know one another. There's not a get-to-knowing process or learning process here. Obviously, we're comfortable with one another or we wouldn't be together today. So it's a good situation. It's a great, great company, along with Cummins on board. And, you know, we're just looking forward to going out here and winning races and focusing on winning a championship.
And now, Martin fans can focus on winning a race-ready, authentic, number 6 Valvoline Ford Thunderbird of their very own. The Valvoline Corporation will give away one of these cars as part of their 10-year celebration in the NASCAR Winston Cup Series with Mark Martin and Jack Roush Racing.
This is absolutely unbelievable. You know, I mean, a true car. I mean, a full car with the engine, a good, you know, with a pedigree, with a history. We're not talking about a show car here, you know, or anything like that. We're talking about one of our good pieces that, you know, to picture that in someone's garage across America is pretty wild. I mean, it certainly will draw a lot of attention to whoever gets it. I bet they'll have a lot of friends over to see it.
Those are some of the fruits of spending 10 successful years in Winston Cup racing. But Martin remembers before that time when he couldn't get a ride and no one was willing to take a chance on him. That's why Mark Martin takes nothing in this sport for granted.
We take it as it comes. We work hard every race. We focus. We've got a great race team, great sponsors, good people. Steve Neal's the best in the business. Jack Roush is the owner of choice for me. Jimmy Finning is new with the program this year and has brought a lot to it. Our deal is stronger and more solid than it's ever been. And I don't know what else you could ask for, you know, than that. I mean, I feel like I've got it all right now.
And Mark certainly is on quite a roll on the NASCAR Winston Cup Series and the NASCAR Busch Series thus far in 1997. Very much a contender to win the championship. Quick timeout. We come back with our driver panel and jump into Saturday's NASCAR Busch Series race from Nazareth, Pennsylvania. That's up shortly. First, Slick 50 Fuel Treatment presents our NASCAR Winston Cup Championship standings. 39 back to Jeff Gordon from leader Terry Labonte. 52 to Jarrett, and there's Mark Martin in 4th going into Sunday's 600 in Charlotte.
If you have a question for our driver panel, send it on a postcard to IWCR Question of the Week. Post Office Box 240417, Charlotte, North Carolina 28224. Or email us at www.speedvision.com. And if we use your question, you'll receive this shirt and cap from Chase Authentics, the choice of champions, the authentic trackside apparel of NASCAR.
John Childers of Louisville, Kentucky writes this week's Question of the Week. In qualifying, if a car tries to get into the race but doesn't make it and doesn't get in on a provisional, do they get any NASCAR Winston Cup points? Start with the drivers. Driver get any points?
I don't think the driver does, but I think that they did this year started getting some points, and I guess that could be good and bad depending on the situation.
Well, NASCAR felt like it was important to reward the team for showing up and attempting to qualify with the intense competition. So what they do is, say 42 cars start the race. The fastest guy that didn't make the race, who would be 43rd in line, he then gets 40 43rd place points, and it drops off 3 on down the line. So that helps teams that support the series week in and week out gain provisionals, hopefully at some point.
43rd place owner points, though.
Right.
I'll point that out. The driver gets nothing. The owner gets owner points, and the owner points are what the provisionals are based off of. Agree, disagree that that's a good thing?
I think it's a good move. I mean, you know, you have new teams that are committed to running a full series, and you miss a couple races. Our super truck team went through this, where we went to Tucson, we towed out there, we missed the show, but at least it's not like you were even 40 points behind last place. You were only 3 points behind last place. So I think it's something good that NASCAR started this year.
All right, John, that's your question. No points for the driver. The owners do get points from whatever the last position of the race was on down on a sliding scale. We hope to hear from you if you've got a question of the week you'd like our drivers to address. Now we shift over to our flashback segment. We swing back to the year 1985 and the very first running of the Winston, the All-Star race at Charlotte that year. A race that ended with our old friend DW in victory lane.
On Saturday, May 25th, 1985, the first running of the Winston took place at Charlotte Motor Speedway. It was an all-star race created for the fans and made especially for the winners on the circuit. It would award no championship points to the winner, but the huge money payoff and the prestige of the event was more than enough to entice the drivers. The starting grid was set with Terry Labonte, the defending Winston Cup champion, on the pole, and the rest of the 12-car field lined up in order by the number of victories they posted in 1984. Ties for position were determined by 84's point standings. Darrell Waltrip, Terry Labonte, Harry Gant, and Jeff Bodine jumped out to an early lead in the race, made up of just one 70-lap segment. There was little excitement in the first half of the race, but Terry Labonte and the 44 Piedmont Chevrolet nipped DW in the Budweiser number 11 at lap 20 for the first of 2 $10,000 bonus laps in the event. The race was unique in that a mandatory green flag pit stop had to be made by all teams during laps 30 and 40. A team could opt to take on 4 tires during the stop, but they had to at least change 2 according to the rules. This was to help tighten the field in case of a runaway leader. And it was the 33 School Bandit piloted by Harry Gant that created a 2.9-second lead to claim the second $10,000 money bonus on lap 55. It looked like Gant was going to finally end a string of bridesmaids finishes and head to the checkered flag. But car owner Junior Johnson, rumored to have said something to Waltrip on the radio, and Darrell began to put the hammer down. With 10 laps to go, the number 11 trailed Gant by over 2 seconds. 5 laps later, it was down to less than a second and a half. And after another 2 laps, Gant's lead was under a second. With just 2 laps to go, Darrell had put the Budweiser Chevy within striking distance of only 2 car lengths. As the cars entered turn 1, Waltrip went high to make a pass at Gant. They were side by side on the backstretch, with Darrell taking the lead in turn 3. DW had to only hold him off for one more circuit on the 1.5-mile speedway. But Gant's tires had gone away, and he could not make a charge at Waltrip on the last lap. He would have to settle for another second-place finish. Darrell Waltrip motored on to claim the checkered flag, but it was just enough motor with his engine blowing up, crossing the finish line. DW made his way to victory lane, where he picked up the $200,000 check and all the bragging rights for the first running of the Winston.
The very first running of the All-Star race back in 1985. I think that engine grenading just across the start-finish line kind of set the tone for some pretty wild things that have happened in that race over the years.
Yeah, definitely. We've had some very unusual things happen. You know, that race has grown so much. If I remember right, that was like the day before the 600.
Right, it was Saturday.
And it's grown into its own weekend, and it's almost like the 600 now as far as crowd and everything. But that race, that engine blowing up has been rumored to be very suspicious for many years now. Why am I looking at you, huh?
Yeah, I don't
Anything you want to fess up about? You feel better?
No, I don't know. I just know that Darrell was extremely lucky by taking the checker and then having the engine blow up, because obviously Harry was right on his bumper. If it had blown up before that, Harry would have won.
We'll come back and get more astute observations from our expert panel of drivers on the Nazareth Busch Series race in a minute. Don't go away. 22-year-old Elliott Sadler scores his first NASCAR Busch Series win, holding off a late charge by Todd Bodine and taking the Core States Advantage 200 in Nazareth, Pennsylvania on Penske Motorsports' 5-turn mile there. Welcome back to Inside Winston Cup Racing. Here to go through the NASCAR Busch Series event with Ken Schrader, Michael Waltrip, and Johnny Benson. That Nazareth racetrack, one of the most oddly shaped speedways that you'll find anywhere. 5 turns around the mile oval. And because the line is a very fine one, working with lap traffic can be very difficult. Here we illustrate with Kevin LePage in the 88 trying to get around Pennsylvania driver Bill Hoff in the 86 at turn 1.
Yeah, that's a really scary corner because you can go in there and almost not lift. You know, during qualifying you definitely hold it down, and he just didn't know he was there, and I tell you what, you can hit that wall a ton right there.
And he pretty well did with the back end of that race car. That was a lap 34. Hoff was okay, but he was the first driver out of the race. After front row starters, Elliott Sadler and Todd Bodine traded the lead twice in the first 2 laps. Sadler moved away and held the lead until lap 40. Meantime, Steve Park has made his way from 6th up to 2nd, and then he goes after Elliott Sadler for the lead.
He had an awesome car. Steve has really shown here lately why everybody thought that he was going to be such a good driver on the NASCAR circuit. He moved from that 6th starting spot and wasted no time getting to the front. And once he got there, it looked like he had things pretty well in hand.
Steve, this is one of the few tracks that he's run so far this season, besides Loudon last week and this particular racetrack, that he had experience on before. So as he's on such a roll, coming to a place he actually knew what he was doing before he got there certainly didn't hurt his chances any. 4 cautions in the first 45 laps of the race. The 4th triggered when Busch North driver Tom Bowles in the white 76, you're not quite going to see until it's already started, nips Stevie Reeves in the 96.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things. The track's so flat, you got no banking to catch you, and you know these cars are on the edge, and boy, it's getting a little worse here. But they're on the edge, and any kind of little bump, like the Bobby Labonte bump at the Winston, just anything.
Especially at that point in the racetrack. That's a blind corner, so when cars start spinning right there, you can just pretty much sit there and add them up as they pile in, because you don't have a good view of what's going on ahead of you. That's why spotters nowadays, you know, are so important, but it happens so quickly. Sometimes when you get the word, you're like, too late.
And one of the tough parts of the Nazareth track is because of its shape, it's hard to put a spotter someplace where he can see the whole track, including that corner. As a result, about 3 other drivers piled into that thing at the end that really maybe didn't need to be in it. So it goes. It's just a very tough blind corner, like Kenny said before. Now, under this caution, Randy LaJoie pits several times. He's had pretty heavy contact with a lap car, and they pull out a piece of string, and they run it down the right side of the car, then the left side of the car. What are they doing?
Well, he looked like he got in the side of somebody with the right front, and they wanted to pull the fender out, and he thought maybe the toe was off, and they put the string on the left side, get the wheel straight, and then go back over to the right to make sure it's not towed out real bad. So
LaJoie's team doing some pretty nifty work. Now, he gave up a lot of track position on this and was well back in the field as we continue to watch them. Here's that string coming out the left side of the car. Gave up a lot of track position for this.
He did, but man, what can you say about Steve Bird and that team? They do this every week, it seems like, overcome some sort of adversity. He gets tangled up with a lap car that he said just kind of cut him off, and that put them in a position to have to come in, work on the car, and get it straightened out. And he winds up finishing 3rd. It didn't look like he had a 3rd-place car before they wrecked it. So after the adjustments, he was able to get it to the front.
And was able to come all the way back up and protect a little bit of his championship lead. LaJoie's back in traffic, but up front, Steve Park has continued to lead until the caution waves at lap 99. Everybody's on pit road. Park's going to lose the lead here. Elliott Sadler's crew is going to get him out first. What I want to point out, watch Hermie Sadler when he comes off his pit stall and the race to get off pit road. It gets a little on the exciting side.
Yeah, it does. You know, you got your guys telling you to go, and you're really not looking to see behind you. And a couple guys get in the grass, and it was pretty tight. But hey, he kept those guys from going by anyway.
Here's Hermie. Watch him right there. About 6 or 7 guys.
That was a nice block. I have to hand it to Hermie. We make a big deal out of pit stops and track position. He picked up about 5 spots worth of track position with that move. And, you know, when you come out of the pits, your goal is just not to get run over. And he accomplished that.
That wasn't working towards that goal, though. I mean, when you come out and you hang a right and then a left, but it definitely helped him.
After the restart with Steve Park back behind Elliott Sadler because of good pit work on Sadler's part, or his crew's part, Park doesn't waste any time, coming right back after him again. Lap 109, here we go.
I tell you, he was really good, and his car right there in the center would be able to stay down the bottom, and they got some pretty good power, and you could stand on it, and off he went.
At that particular corner, he had such a good run to the inside of him. That's a tough place to hook up real low.
It is, especially when you're right behind a car like that. He was right on the tail of that Phillips 66 car, and when he went to turn that car, a lot of times you'll lose grip in the front of him because you don't have that air pushing down on the front of the car. That makes that move even more impressive, and took the lead at lap 110. He said his engine started messing up at lap 112, so that's unfortunate.
We'll talk about his engine in just a second. Want to jump back to our friend Phil Parsons, having a good day with a good run going until things go awry. Let's see, what have we done here? We have jumped on ahead a little bit, I believe. This is Elliott Sadler going back around Steve Park after his engine leak. All right, let's talk about that now.
I thought that'd be a good thing to talk about. That engine is obviously down on power. You've seen Elliott just pull around and make his way. And anytime an engine starts to misfire like that, it gradually gets worse and worse. And Steve eventually wound up with the black flag and sitting in the pits. And
a very, very bad finish after a very good day. Want to move ahead to the final few laps of the race now. As we get down toward the finish, Elliott Sadler's got a big lead on Todd Bodine. He's got almost 2 seconds on him, but over the final 20 laps of the race, Bodine is able to close that down from 2 seconds to 2 car lengths to about nothing. Going to look at the interval here. You see Sadler there and Bodine in the yellow car. Pretty good bit behind him there. And then as we'll cut ahead in just a moment to a few laps later, he's not all far behind him at all. So at a place like Nazareth, how'd he do that?
Well, Todd was just really coming on good there and had his car working. Elliott was probably conserving just a little bit not to make a mistake. And then catching someone and then being able to actually pass them is 2 different things also.
Now we're down to the white flag lap here, and he's got 2 lap cars going to race side by side in front of him in the final turns.
I think they probably tell him on the radio, just don't let him get on the inside of you. You know, if he wants to go to the outside, let him go to the outside. And as you can see, he did try, and he got a little loose, but Elliott did a great job to be able to keep that car up front all day and be able to get his first win. That's good for the whole team.
Todd said that, just like we were talking about before with Steve Grissom in the Winston Open, he said, I used up what I had trying to get to him. What's he mean by that?
Well, these tires are real sensitive. A lot of people make comments about being smooth and being consistent, but when you get yourself in a little bit of a hole you got to dig out of, you just go as hard as you can, because if you don't catch them, you'll never know what was going to happen. He thinks that when in his making up that deficit we saw on the screen, that he got the best of his tires. Not that he necessarily wore them out, but he probably overheated whichever tire he was abusing the most. In that case, he said it was the right front kind of went away. If the car had been a little loose, it might have been the right rear. So you just overheat that tire, and it quits adhering to the track as good as it was earlier.
Check the finishing order from Sunday's 200-miler for the NASCAR Busch Series. Elliott Sadler in victory lane for the very first time. Randy LaJoie rallies back to just finish 1 spot behind Todd Bodine. And what a great run for Dale Shaw, the Busch North Series driver, in his second run in the James Finch car. And how about Joe Bessie? Really acquitted himself well after what's been a not too good a season so far.
No, Joe Bessie and Dale Shaw did an excellent job coming through the field and having a good run.
We look back now at some of the drivers who had problems, including Phil, was swept up in an accident while running in the top 10 late in the race, backed into the wall, bent up the back end of his car, had to kind of limp around to the finish. Dick Trickle had some handling problems all day, and there you see Steve Park with the engine problems that dropped him out of the event before it was done. Championship standings, 3 between LaJoie and Todd Bodine. It was 8 going in. Todd chopped 5 off. 3 the difference between the two, headed to Charlotte this Saturday. One year ago, Mark Martin scores the second of what's now 3 straight NASCAR Busch Series wins at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and Dale Jarrett whips the field in the Coca-Cola 600. Both of those events up this weekend out at the Mile and a Half racetrack, and we are back now inside our Charlotte studios to preview those races with Ken Schrader, Michael Waltrip, and Johnny Benson. The couple of issues where the 600 is concerned, obviously the length of the race. We'll start, though, with the fact that it starts an hour later this year than it did last year. Effect?
Well, I'm sure it'll affect it a little bit. I mean, it's so hot during the day down here now that it does make a difference in the handling of the car from the starting in the day into the nights. So hopefully that hour just help it just a little bit. Probably not a lot, but a little bit.
Let's take a spin around the Charlotte Motor Speedway and get a few pointers from our drivers on what they face in the course of 600 miles. Michael, take us around.
We're going down into turn one. Turn one's a little bit tricky to get into. There's a little bit of a hump just as you enter, and the goal once you get down in the corner is to land at that white line. If you can get to that white line and map the gas, generally from there on around turns 1 and 2 is a free ticket. The car really wants to stick well off of this corner as compared to coming off turn 4 where we see a lot of trouble sometimes.
The turns have been paved since the straightaways, and the back straightaway here gets pretty rough. You're flying down into 3, and you smoke down in here to about here before you let up, and then the ideal goal down to the line, just like Mikey said, down turn 1 and 2. But as the race goes on, you'll see the groove widen out, and you can run about any place on that track.
And coming off turn 4, right about there, you can get yourself in trouble on the outside of a car and bump the wall, and that's a pretty difficult spot. So the front stretch, pretty smooth until you get just about right in that area, and it gets a little whoops there before you get to turn 1, but on a straightaway, it's not too big a deal.
Extra 100 miles in this race. Much of a difference?
I think it's made a lot of difference in the past. We've seen guys leading it at the 500-mile point that didn't quite make it the last 100. It just adds that much more pressure to the team and to the driver and to the equipment, especially. Might lay down them last 100 miles. I think there's a guy sitting here beside me that would have won that race a couple of years ago had it been just your basic 500-miler.
Yeah, we came up 40 laps short, so 60 miles, you know. I think more on the equipment than the drivers. A lot of the drivers like Charlotte. It's one of the tracks, even though it's a 600-mile race, you run a good average speed there. So we've got races that actually take us longer, but the demands on the mechanical parts of the car that make a difference.
So the thoughts from our driver panel on the 600 at Charlotte this coming Sunday, plus the 300 on Saturday for the Busch Series. And we'll be back here on Speed Vision next Monday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, with the drivers to take you through those races.
Next week on IWCR, we'll introduce you to one of the Diamond Ridge Motorsports drivers, Jeff Green. Now with a win under his belt and a smile on his face, he's taking aim at the 1997 Busch Series Championship.
Back with just enough time to wrap up the program. One of the things we didn't mention coming up this weekend, the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series at I-70 Speedway in Missouri. Mr. Schrader, you're familiar with that racetrack. Give us a real quick preview.
Right outside of Kansas City, high-banked half-mile, very similar to Bristol. Always an exciting race. Easy to get out of the ballpark there.
We'll wrap that race up, along with the Busch Series and Winston Cup races from Charlotte with Kenny, Michael, and Johnny next week, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, Monday night on Speed Vision. Alan Bestbrook, see you then.
Inside Winston Cup Racing has been brought to you by Slick 50. Use new Slick 50 Synchron Fuel System Treatment, the 5,000-mile performer. And by Slim Jim. When you need a little excitement, snap into a beefy, spicy Slim Jim. Drivers, race teams, and race fans, the 1997 Simpson Race Products catalog is now available, featuring all the new products and services for 97, plus Simpson's complete line of racer and fan gear. To get your copy, call 1-800-71-RACIN and join Team Simpson today.